Welcome to the Audrey Hall Show. I'm your host, Audrey Hall, and my first guest today is Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll. She made history with former Attorney General and current Governor Maura Healey when they topped the ticket on November 8th, 2022, winning 86% of the vote to be elected as the first all-female executive team in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And for Driscoll, that victory came after 4 consecutive wins in Salem, Massachusetts, where she served as the city's 50th mayor. Before becoming mayor, she serves as an elected member of the Salem City Council and worked as the Deputy Chief Manager and Chief Legal Counsel for the City of Chelsea. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
So great to be here.
So nice to have you. And I just think after this first year, full year, a little over a year as being Lieutenant Governor, I'd love to hear how you would describe that first year and what surprised you and challenged you the most.
Yeah, super grateful. I would say gratitude ended the first year and started the first year. Both Governor Healey and myself feel grateful to be in a position where we can shape and influence what's happening in the Commonwealth, shift and shape resources, and to be the first all-female team doing it just made it extra special. And so the first year's been a whirlwind. I can't believe the first year is over. Like, it feels like it just started.
Yeah.
We're grateful to be able to work so, I think, cohesively with the legislature, accomplishing things like the first tax relief package in over 20 years in this Commonwealth, really trying to make sure we're meeting an agenda tied to making Massachusetts more affordable, more competitive, and more equitable. And that tax relief is really going back to a lot of families and seniors, given that there's a lot of things that we're paying more for, right? Costs are higher. So that's a big piece of it. We're focused on housing. We filed the largest state housing production plan in the state's history, $4.1 billion. We worked hard to make sure we're moving the needle when it comes to climate, and really wanted trying to support public education. Free community college for anyone over the age of 25 has made a meaningful impact on workforce, on moving economic mobility for families. So we're grateful for the first year, feel like very optimistic about year 2, starting our sophomore year.
Starting your sophomore year. And were there any surprises in the first year? Anything that really caught you off guard or took you by surprise?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge that we've had in this first year is just managing the migrant crisis. That wasn't something that we necessarily anticipated, and we've just seen, we've got 7,500 families in shelter. Some of those are Massachusetts families. It puts an exclamation point on the housing challenges we have in this state, but many of them are new arrivals who are coming here seeking a better life. We're a right to shelter state, which means we have a duty, but I think it's consistent with our humanitarian values. But it's a big challenge trying to ensure that we have safe, accessible housing, and it's something that we have an incident command. We've declared an emergency. We're working hard every day, and we're pushing the federal government and Congress to really act to support both, border reform and dollars for communities impacted. We're not the only ones,
right,
but there are many.
What does it mean when you say we're a right to shelter state?
Yeah, so many years ago in the 80s, the Commonwealth passed legislation that meant that families who are homeless have a right to shelter, which created an obligation for the state to create an emergency assistance shelter program to provide shelter for families, particularly for families who may be having just economic circumstances that led to them being homeless. Of course, now we have a housing crunch, so we have many more of our own Massachusetts families.
Compounds the problem.
Exactly. And then we have a number of new arrivals who are coming here with young children, on these journeys that are months of walking and, going over the Darien Pass to get here.
Why are they coming? What are they leaving?
I think they're fleeing really war-torn circumstances. They are refugees. The folks who are in our shelter system have lawful status to be here. They are parolees seeking refugee status, seeking parolee status. That means they crossed a border lawfully, but then are here, and they're in lots of places in states that don't have right to shelter. So I think the fact that we have this is just, consistent with our values. And I think even places that don't have a right to shelter law are experiencing an uptick in new arrivals. And so
I think people never expected the volume, the general mass of society doesn't expect that this many people are going to need that help. And so there becomes an us and them thing, and people get a little resentful about that.
It's really hard, for sure.
How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think I understand where that sentiment is coming from, because we have struggles here. We certainly have folks who are working hard and are still struggling to keep a roof over their head, and they see newcomers coming. I will also say that, these are children and families and women and young kids. So notwithstanding, the us versus them, they're here. And so we have a humanitarian obligation to try and do what we can. We put a cap in place, I think we recognize. Our compassion is endless, but our ability to house people is not.
Well, and even with a cap, it's hard to just just turn the spigot off or to say, okay, you know, we end the line here. Or,
You got it.
But I know that the governor has reached out to the Biden administration
Yep.
About immigration reform.
We have. I know there's a bill pending in Congress right now to try and provide additional aid and assistance and also put some reforms in place to maybe stem the tide of folks who are coming here. So far, we haven't seen any action. It doesn't feel like there's a cavalry coming.
Right.
And in light of that, we're all going to try and do our part. And frankly, if we do this right, we have 3,000 new arrivals who got their work permits authorized. We had an expedited work authorization clinic. These folks are eager to work, and Lord knows we have plenty of jobs that are open. So if we can make these connections with, you know, sure, helping people in the short term with an eye towards getting them into a workforce, meeting our workforce needs in a more stable setting, this could be something that really works out. Massachusetts has had waves of immigrants coming here for 400 years. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. I know why people come here, and we just need to figure out how to manage it in a way that's meaningful for us.
And we're not an island, and we have borders, which makes it even harder. And I think that we have to, and it's a partnership between the federal government and the state government. And there really has never been really solid, good immigration laws.
This has been an ongoing issue for decades.
No
Republicans,
administration
Democrats,
really
whoever it is.
Right.
And I think we're unfortunately at the end of all of those, you know, failed actions are people here. And so what do? We're trying to do the humanitarian thing.
So what are you asking people in Massachusetts to do about it?
Yeah.
What are you asking from them?
I think two things. One, compassion would be one way to look at this. Like, these are folks who are coming here in need. Two, connecting on employment. If you've got a job that you cannot fill, or jobs, we have folks who are eager to work. So we're doing that, matching up right now with individuals who are having their work authorizations. I want to say very clearly, these folks are eager to work. Like, every shelter we've been in, folks want a job. They don't want to stay there. They don't want to be a burden. They are very clear about that, but we've got to make that match up. And we're doing that. That work is underway.
How do you do that? How do people reach out if they have jobs?
So they can go to, we have a website set up, which I will get you the name of that,
Okay.
so we can post it when this is up on the air.
Great.
And it's our way of, you know, connecting people who want to work. We're in 90 different communities, so we've got employment opportunities throughout the Commonwealth, and we are matching people up. My own hometown of Salem, where we have a shelter, the Salem Hospital just filled their housekeeping department, fully staffed for the first time, by being able to hire folks who've been residing in the shelter there. So there's some wins here, notwithstanding some of the challenges.
Okay. Stepping off of that for a moment, let's talk a little local. What are the administration's top priorities for the Framingham and Metro West area?
Yeah, so excited to be here in Framingham, working closely with Mayor Sisitsky. Obviously, you have the Senate President representing this area. You couldn't ask for better leadership there at the legislative level. And for us, I think that we see real opportunities in our urban centers, particularly our gateway cities, places that brought great prominence and wealth and supported strong regional economies. And how do we continue to stand these places up and, you know, sort of put our thumb on the scale when it comes to housing, when it comes to workforce, when it comes to opportunity to grow the economy. We have a number of state programs. Framingham has been an active participant in, from helping support downtown initiatives to ensuring we're thinking about how we can support housing for workers. So many of our communities are unaffordable now. Places that used to be affordable, where you could, I like to say, pour coffee or pour beer for a living and put a roof over your head, that's harder. And we focused on gateway cities to make sure we have things like a housing development incentive program. So folks who are working, making too much to qualify for a subsidy, but not enough to keep up with fast rising rents. Well, these programs are designed to ensure that we're building housing to meet that need.
Is Framingham an official gateway city? I don't think it ever got that designation.
Well, it's certainly gateway-like. They meet a lot of
but the
same.
education level was higher than the criteria for the gateway
That's the
cities.
only thing I think they missed out on, but they certainly are gateway-like, and therefore a lot of the programs that are designed to support gateway cities, they're amenable here in Framingham. The supports that we have tied to economic development, the one-stop program, supports for schools. I mean, Senator Spilka has been a strong supporter of ensuring the Student Opportunity Act fully funds places that have urban challenges within our schools, higher ELL populations, more mobility. And so I think those are resources that we're investing in, trying to ensure that these middle markets, these communities they're the leader in their region, that they have the supports to stand up and can still be a place that's the economic engine for the rest of the communities nearby.
When you talk about that and you talk about housing, you know, there's always the issue of density. And I know that there's been a movement towards putting more housing near mass transportation. But then you come into that whole issue of density, and when did it become too dense? Now, I know that for many years, Framingham has met the threshold and gone over the threshold of having 10% or more of affordable housing. by state law, that's required, but many of the neighboring communities don't. So why is there a push to bring more housing into communities that have met that threshold than to the neighboring communities that haven't?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One thing to keep in mind, the 10% threshold is related to 40B, right?
Okay.
40B, the Anti-Snob Zoning Act, is what it was framed as when it was first adopted.
So that people could build where neighbors might not necessarily want them to build.
Exactly. Almost gave you kind of a super permit to build affordable housing in places that didn't meet that 10% threshold. It was never meant to be the limit that if you have 10%, you're out, you're done.
It was meant to be a minimum, right?
Right. It's meant to be a minimum.
But so many communities have not come close to meeting that minimum.
Which means they are subject to this special permit that is like a super permit where developers can build.
Only they are subject to it?
Yes. You can still have a 40B project, but it's known as a friendly 40B in a place that's over 10%. If you're below 10%, you have additional, I would say, expedited permitting opportunities under that law. But the real goal here is we're not building enough housing anywhere in the Commonwealth. And so one of the reasons we're looking at transit-oriented development and density is because density can really be your friend if you're talking about building close to transit and frankly close to downtown centers.
Especially if the transit is reliable, though,
well,
right?
for sure. We have a lot of work to do in terms of ensuring the MBTA has the investments they need. But it's not only about transit that's back and forth to Boston. It's about transit that's around your region.
Right.
And creating
regional transportation like the MWRTA.
Exactly. And creating environments from land use policies where maybe you don't need transit at all in a walkable community. And that's where density can really be your friend because it can support the coffee store, the grocery store, the sorts of things that you may need in your everyday lives without necessarily needing a car. So many older adults want to move into places like that, and young adults too.
They do, and they want to age in place. They want to start new families. They want to start their careers, and they want to have housing. And obviously, they need housing.
Yep.
I think that the problem is it affordable housing? The definition of affordable really is not lined up with what the salaries are for those who are looking for affordable housing.
Sure.
And developers will tell you they make as much by building by charging $3,000 a month and building something that has high density. They make as much. They pay as much for a 2x4 to build that than they pay for a 2x4 to build something that's more affordable. So that's why they'd rather build something that they can charge more money for. So how do we work with that? It's the developers in their hands so much of the time.
Well, I don't want to villainize developers because we all live in a house that probably a developer built at some point in time.
Right.
And the reason that housing is expensive to build in Massachusetts is the land's expensive, the cost of the lumber is expensive,
right.
The cost of the labor to build it, interest rates are up. So it's not always just that people are, trying to make a higher profit than they should. It's expensive from the get-go. One of the areas that we think we can work on is density. If you can build a little bit more units into a space, particularly if you can do it in concert with your community, you might be able to drive down the cost. So that's called smart growth zoning, looking at things like micro units, looking for transit-oriented development where you don't have to pay for the cost of parking associated with parking minimums that have driven up the cost of housing. Most importantly, working with communities to do solid planning. All of us want development by choice, not development by chance in our communities. And if you just leave it to the market, they're going to build market housing. It's a capitalist society. But if we're able to work in concert with communities and identify places we want growth and support smart growth policies, we think we can build the type of housing we need in our communities.
So you're the chair of the Housing Advisory Council.
I am.
And what does that mean? What are you hoping that council can accomplish?
A few things. One, it complements the Housing Bond Bill, which is providing resources and shaping policies aimed at accelerating production. We have not built enough housing in Massachusetts, and partly that's because we have 351 cities and towns that have their own zoning, and oftentimes people are saying no for all the reasons you just mentioned. We have to adopt a pro-growth, pro-housing agenda that enables us to support quality of life, protect the character of neighborhoods that we like and appreciate, but plan for where we want housing. This Housing Advisory Council will look at what are the barriers to growing housing, how do we work more concretely and more uniformly. If we have 351 separate housing plans that we know are not meeting the demands that we have as folks who we're all living longer, we need more housing to support aging in place with dignity and respect. We know we have a lot of new people who are here and want to stay here, went to school here, but our largest outmigration is 26 to 35-year-olds who are leaving mostly because of the cost of housing. And when you start to see that talent drip moving away, that's really fearful for those of us who want to have a thriving economy. So it's all related. This Housing Council will be looking at what are the barriers and what are the ways that we can accelerate housing.
How often will they report to you?
Well, we've got a pretty good roundtable of people who are not only housing advocates, people who build housing, people who build affordable housing, really making sure that we're digging in on some of the challenges. being willing to hold a mirror up to ourselves as a state and as a city to see what we can do to drive acceleration. So we've got a regular, sort of schedule and a report that will be due in less than a year that we need to get to work on.
Have they been given specific direction as far as what you want in the report, and it'll be actionable?
Yeah, just getting up and running in terms of, who's doing what. But we think this is going to be a really action-oriented plan. This housing bond bill already has identified a number of the policy shifts that we are, hoping to put in place. So that's currently before the legislature. This would be sort of 2.0. How do we really move forward and have a housing production? There are parts of Western Mass, when we connect it with transportation, they're going to be more affordable, more able to support housing growth. There are places we already know in, existing communities that are looking for redevelopment. Maybe they have old mills or an industry that's gone away that can support historic adaptive reuse. So we really want to make this a targeted approach to growing and accelerating the pace of housing in Massachusetts.
When you say a targeted approach, are you saying a universal approach, or are you saying it'll still be specific to the communities, or both?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, because although we have different regions, sometimes there are issues and challenges that are the same. It's not necessarily unique. We have mills in Holyoke that could be repurposed. We have mills in Lawrence that can and are being repurposed. So some of this will be amenable in different regions, and then there might be more targeted areas where we know we have specific, in more urban centers, we have a lot of contamination, right? Leftover challenges that make it a little bit harder. So we may be speaking to a specific area like that.
Will any of the zoning authority be taken away from the local municipalities?
So right now, the only, I would say, pullback on local control would be the MBTA Communities Act. There's also an ADU by law, statewide, that's included in this housing bond bill. I think we really want to look at the rest of it. I'm a former local mayor. We all love our local autonomy, but if local autonomy, is leading to saying no to all the types of housing that we need, I think we need to examine what can we do to work together on this.
And
it's to everyone's benefit. The MBTA Communities Act is a requirement that you have multifamily zoning as of right within a certain distance. There's 177 communities served by the MBTA. So if you have this public good of transportation, the goal is that you'd also enhance the type of housing you have through multifamily zoning.
Have you put any projections to this in terms of all these efforts and what what the results and the outcomes are going to be?
Yeah, the housing bond bill anticipates that we'll be able to create or preserve almost 70,000 units if it's implemented. Why that's important is, one, it also is talking about preserving existing public housing. Massachusetts owns, as a state, the most public housing of any state in the country, 44,000 units. Most of it's with our local housing authorities. It doesn't feel like enough, does it? It doesn't feel like enough. We've got long lists at all of our housing authorities, but those buildings were all created 30, 40 years ago, and they need upgrades, they need modernization. We see an opportunity to really make sure they're more resilient as we move forward, and probably grow some more units. If you look at some of our housing authority parcels, having large concentrations of poverty in one place isn't a great model. We know that now. Can we add some units and create some mixed income communities in those places? Probably. We've got some good examples of that already. So this housing bond bill incorporates not only new production and accelerating that, but also let's modernize and preserve and maybe expand what we already have.
And how do you build or ensure any level of affordability into all of that?
Yeah, a couple of different ways. The tried and true way is through low-income housing tax credits. That's the way we build most of our affordable housing pipeline. It's usually nonprofit developers, the development community in general. There's private sector developers, and then there's folks who work in this nonprofit space, community development corporations, housing authorities, things like that. So this will enhance the amount of low-income housing tax credits we have. We also want to try and accelerate the growth of housing that's already permitted but is sitting on the sidelines because it's just not penciling out given some of the increased costs we've seen. So creating what's called a momentum fund, where the state and our partners like Mass Housing might actually take an equity stake rather than just a subsidy. Maybe we can take an equity stake in the capital and get that money back and then recycle it to help, when it comes to borrowing for other projects. So there's a couple of different strategies.
It really is.
It is. This would be a new opportunity. It's only been tried in a few places that have really strong housing markets and really high costs. Those two things are our biggest limiting factor here in Massachusetts.
We need a lot of creative answers like that. That's a really interesting approach. Let's talk for a minute about the impact that Airbnb has had on the housing market. When you talk to people, they say that housing supply is down because so many people prefer to rent on a daily basis and are no longer making their properties available for those that want to rent on a monthly basis?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing in seasonal communities some impact from that. Some of it has always been in play, I would say. When you think about Cape Cod, lots of folks who may have had second homes, but they're not really renting them out anything other than seasonal. Same thing in the Berkshires, other
It's
areas.
so easy for them to do it now.
It is.
It was never this easy.
And so the platform making it easier, you're definitely seeing an expansion of that. We're also seeing communities respond to that by creating, I would say, regulations locally that you can't have an Airbnb unit if it's not owner occupied, so that you're not taking a rental unit, away from a monthly rental or a tenancy. And so it's something that I think needs to be monitored, and working closely with communities to identify what are the strategies. If this is happening in your community, where I was the mayor in Salem, that's a tourism-based community. Sure. You can rent out your unit for a lot of money as you think about the fall and October and Halloween. We weren't seeing as many people taking off units because we required owner occupancy, but there were people who were using it as a second income, renting out a room or finding a way to have a side hustle for use of their units.
But that was a city requirement, right? Not a state requirement.
It was a city requirement.
You don't foresee any state requirements coming down the road?
This is an area where I think we want to leave it up to locals. Like, they're going to know their communities best, and I think they certainly want to support having a strong regional economy, and so many of our workers in the hospitality and tourism industry need a place to stay as well. So, for us, making sure locals they're the closest to that challenge, and if it's happening in their community, they certainly have the tools to try and address it.
Let's talk for a minute about the economy. The budget passed for fiscal 25?
For 24. We just submitted it for 25.
You submitted, what was it, $56 billion budget for fiscal 25?
56 billion with a B.
With a B.
Yeah, with a B.
So what are some of the ways that you feel are a little more innovative and creative for looking to increase revenue, and maybe at the same time to control expenses?
Yeah, there's a few things in there. When you talk about a budget that's $56 billion, it can feel overwhelming, but honestly, all of those dollars are related to people and services. The vast, majority of this budget, I should say the majority of this budget, is going to health and human services, taking care of some of our most vulnerable populations, ensuring that we have health insurance for children, and are sort of connected with our values as a state and a commonwealth. We also know we're making investments in education. So things like the Student Opportunity Act, fully funding increases for public K through 12 school is important to us. As I mentioned, Mass Reconnect, that investment continues to ensure community college for anyone over the age of 25 is free. Pretty transformational in terms of the individuals we're helping.
Anyone who doesn't already have any kind of degree?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so I should say any kind of degree. The reason we picked 25, like why 25? What's the magic of that? Well, there are 750,000 adults in Massachusetts over the age of 25 who have some credentialing, meaning they started college, but maybe life got in the way. And at 25, you're at a point where maybe you are a little more seasoned and are thinking about what you want to do for a career. And those connections are really syncing up. We're seeing double-digit increases in our community colleges, with folks really honing in on what type of career builder can I utilize through community college, credentialing program, a two-year degree that may lead to a four-year degree, without having the barriers of how am I going to pay for it, how am I going to juggle all of the extras that come with going to school, maybe while also holding down a job. So that for us is not only helping create a workforce pipeline, we're a knowledge-based economy. Like 52% of Massachusetts residents have a 4-college degree. We lead the nation of all states. But that means there's a whole other 50% that don't have a college degree. How do we make sure that they can participate in an innovation economy? And that's partly what this Mass Reconnect is about. The second thing we've done is also make investments in public higher ed. I'm a public higher ed grad, a proud Viking from Salem State University. Our public universities are the most accessible universities we have. They're also the places where we know 75% of the graduates stay in Massachusetts afterwards. There are future nurses and teachers and bank owners and entrepreneurs. So when we invest in those public higher ed institutions, we can make them more affordable. So we have massively ramped up what we call our Mass Plus scholarship program to ensure that more families can have affordable tuition. When I went to Salem State, you could hustle all summer, work a couple of jobs, be a bad waitress, which I was, and still make enough resources to kind of pay for your tuition and fees. For many students, that's not the case. So making investments in higher ed this year, new in the FY25 budget, is an exclamation point in additional resources for childcare. One of the big issues we hear about in terms of Massachusetts being a high-cost state is not only housing, but the cost of childcare. As someone who had 3 kids myself, that we were doing the hustle and drop-off and pickups, and leaving a second mortgage payment with our wonderful caregivers. It's so expensive if you can find a place.
If you can find
coming out of this pandemic. So really leaning in to try and offer high quality pre-K experiences. We want all 4-year-olds to be able to go to a high quality pre-K for free in Massachusetts. We're making investments to get there. And then also subsidizing our childcare programs. What we learned during the pandemic is this care economy tied to early childcare, early ed, is very, very fragile. Many markets did not come back, many operators. And so with federal funding, we boosted it up to make sure that it was available. That continues and more, so we can get more people in the workforce. It is primarily holding back women who are, staying home, who feel like they don't have a choice because they don't have options for high quality pre-K. We're working closely with the business community to support these investments as well. So that's new in this budget. We continue to make investments in our rural communities as well. We've got lots of places in Western Mass, frankly, in different parts, the Cape as well, that don't necessarily have access to the same resources. And lastly, investments in climate. Like, we're not going to outrun, this climate crisis. We're seeing more and more bad weather and, all of the effects of
erratic weather.
Erratic,
yeah,
right?
Totally.
And so we have established a disaster relief and recovery fund, trying to make sure we can have a rapid response for communities, build in that infrastructure, and not just put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Like, how do we build a more resilient future and future-proof some of our infrastructure?
It's very important. Let's talk for a minute, just going back to the child care issue. Are you thinking about any kind of child care tax credits or anything along those lines? Because the services that you're talking about are not always accessible to everyone.
It's really hard to do this all on your own as a state government. We're going to need partnerships with business, and that means a number of our corporate partners are stepping up to identify what can they do. Can they pull the infrastructure in for buildings? Can they provide some kind of tax relief, or we have child care tax credits. Part of that tax bill that we talked about earlier that was passed this year, first time in 20 years, it's the highest child independent tax credit in the country in Massachusetts. That's dollars back in pockets of working families, some of whom are paying for childcare. And most of that's going to end up in the local economy, to be quite honest. So we're trying to do our part, but it is going to take, I think, a concerted effort with the business community and others and including the feds. There's been a fair amount of discussion. We haven't seen as much action as we want with respect to child care tax credits at the federal level as well, which would make it much more affordable and create more operators and high quality operators. That's what we really need.
Do you feel that in terms, and now you're talking about climate change, we're jumping, we have so many important topics to talk about here. What are some of the key ingredients to climate change that are built into your plan?
Yeah, we're fortunate that we're the only state in the nation that has a climate chief at the cabinet level. So we have an individual, Melissa Hoffer, who is not only ensuring that we're thinking about the landscape, what we can do as a state, but what are we doing in state agencies? How do we embed a more resilient future in everything that we're doing, from MassDOT to the MBTA to how we think about housing? Some of that work includes the nation's first green climate bank aimed at tackling how we modernize a lot of our affordable housing units. That's got some state money and some federal money that's going to help us think about building out a more resilient future. We have a program known as the MVP, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Project or Initiative. This is a program designed to help communities identify what are your greatest vulnerabilities tied to the climate crisis. If you think about where you're locating your water filtration systems, or areas that are prone to flooding, what's there that's going to be problematic. And then you do the planning and assessment. And then we have MVP 2.0 that helps you identify how you're going to fix it. Is it mitigation? Is it adaptation? And we have a lot of innovation happening in this space. The other big area for us is offshore wind. We have got to figure out how to decarbonize. Offshore wind also offers an opportunity for us to grow an economy here tied to climate tech. We have this amazing innovation of minds and research and opportunities to make sure we're leading in how we save this planet, whether it's through offshore wind and creating clean energy options, or all the things that go along with it, from batteries and EVs and the R&D behind finding other more innovative ways to make sure we're being resilient in the future.
Let's talk for a minute about human rights in Massachusetts and how we can protect them here, even if they're not going to be protected at the federal level.
Yeah. What a time to be in state government. So much of what people care about, the Supreme Court is sort of pushing down to states, whether it's guns, reproductive rights, voting rights. And so I think Governor Healy and I are so proud to be in a place that is upholding all of those freedoms. We'll be celebrating the 250th revolution in just a few short years. And it all started here, like the cradle of democracy. And I think we're really committed to making sure reproductive freedoms are not something people have to worry about. LGBTQ and trans families and children are protected here, working hard to make sure that voting rights are available and accessible to all.
Are they bulletproof? I mean, if the federal administration, if the seat in the White House changes, is there security there?
I will tell you, the good thing is we have a legislative partners, both Senator Spilka, Speaker Mariano, and a governor who are committed to making sure we are embedding these sorts of values in what we do. And if the Supreme Court wants to push it down to states, which we're seeing, and we have states passing horrible laws, in my opinion, 6-week abortion bans and less. Well, that's not going to happen here in Massachusetts. And as a result, we're seeing people moving to Massachusetts because they care about those freedoms.
Do you think that you're going to be able to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish in one term?
Probably not, but we're going to try like hard. We're really optimistic. I hope you can tell from just our conversation today that we do feel a sense of urgency. Like it is an honor to serve in these roles. We have a governor, both of us come from working class backgrounds. We really appreciate the people that we have in this Commonwealth, the trust they've placed in us, and we see the sense of urgency to tackle these challenges. And so we've had 1 year under our belt, and we're really feeling optimistic. It's going to get tougher. There's going to be belt tightening. There's going to be challenges for sure. But we're really hopeful that by coming together, working across sector, private sector, public sector, nonprofit institutions, all branches of government, local, state, and federal, we can do a lot of good for the people here in Massachusetts.
And all the work that you are doing, how do you get that information to the people? It's getting harder and harder to do that.
I know.
Hopefully today helps. But how do you get that information? We talked about so much that people aren't even aware of.
I know. Well, that's one of the reasons I'm here. And as someone who was a longtime believer in community newspapers, and that's how we got information out, as a city or town, we're really pulling for all of our regional newspapers to be able to provide information, and we certainly support and salute those efforts. And as much as you can love or hate social media, you can spread a lot of information. You can spread a lot of misinformation too, but you can spread a lot of information. And clearly, when there are things happening at the state, it's picked up by the media. But we're trying to get information out through all the channels that we have available to us because we think having an engaged citizenry, whether they like what we're doing or don't like what we're doing, is important.
Right. And perhaps maybe exploring www.mass.gov is a start.
Absolutely.
You have a constituent's phone number as well that people can call if they have questions or want information.
100%.
Anything else that you'd like to suggest that people do or ask them to do?
Yeah, I think we really want people to stay engaged and help us. We're at our best in Massachusetts when people come together to solve the toughest challenges. It's one of the reasons we've been fortunate to win so many of these federal grants and hubs, whether it's ARPA-H, the federal moonshot tied to saving lives and medical devices, or the Chips and Sciences bill, like how do we have tiny semiconductors, microelectronics that are going to safeguard the nation. Those hubs, those opportunities are happening here. And I think it's just a tribute to the people who are here, the commitment to work together, and even when we have really tough challenges, whether it's new arrivals or how we educate kids coming out of this post-pandemic, when people to come together, we know we're going to be a better Commonwealth.
Well, thank you, and thank you for enlightening everyone today with all of this information and for all the good work that you're doing. Greatly appreciated.
Thanks for having me. I'll be back anytime. Okay?
I hope so.
All right.
Special thanks to Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll for joining me today on the show in the AFTV studio here in Framingham. The Healy-Driscoll administration has a designated number for constituent services. It's 617-725-4005. And more information about the administration's work and priorities can be found at www.mass.gov. Joining me next is State Representative Jack Patrick Lewis, and we will be right back.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. If you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Jack Patrick Lewis is the state representative for the 7th Middlesex District, which includes all of Ashland and 11 of Framingham's precincts. He's also the chair of the House Committee on Federal Stimulus and Census Oversight, and he was appointed to serve on the Joint Committee on Health Care Financing. I'm so happy to have State Representative Jack Patrick Lewis here with me today. Thank you for being here today, Jack.
Thank you, Audrey, for the invitation.
You know, I was looking at your inauguration date and thinking, wow, it's been 7 years. You've been in office for a long time as a representative for Ashland and a lot of Framingham. What over your work during that 7 years, what about your work over those 7 years stands out to you the most?
Oh, great question to begin with. I think going into running for office and getting elected, I knew that this was a people job, that it was all about relationships. But 7 years in, I think that's the thing that most stands out to me is nothing is done at the State House without relationships with colleagues, relationships with leadership. No bills are passed without relationships with community partners. And locally, if your constituents don't trust you, you don't get elected or re-elected. But a lot of the work we do is having casual conversations with folks, maybe while playing chair volleyball at the Callahan Center or scooping mashed potatoes at the Ashland Senior Center. It's not necessarily something that one could put down into, these are concrete numbers or this is a job description. But a lot of the job is just showing up and listening. And I knew that was going to be a big part of it. Being a minister by training, that's what I most enjoyed about my previous work, and it's probably what I most enjoy about this job as well.
Well, you mentioned being a minister, so before we get into the nuts and bolts of this job, why don't you talk a little bit about how your background educationally and just professionally, and personally fits into and plays a role in what you do as a state representative?
Actually, I love talking about what brought me here. As I said, my training is as an ordained minister. Most recently, I served as one of the ministers at the Unitarian Church in Wellesley. And so my profile was mostly around social justice work and education, so adult and youth education and youth group programs. The social justice work was a lot of the work I'm doing now, but in a nonpartisan setting. So a lot of work around how to welcome and support immigrants, how to fight climate change. Of course, my personal beliefs and the work of the church grew out of values and a spirituality, but everything from preaching on a Sunday morning to supporting a congregant who recently lost a loved one, to challenging young people to think of the world differently. Every skill I developed in seminary and at the church, I've been able to translate way easier than I would have imagined into the day-to-day operations of being a state rep. Mm-hmm. But what first brought me to Massachusetts was a job at the Unitarian Church in Wellesley. My then not yet husband at the time, we moved here. I worked then with the congregation to start a youth group for LGBTQ young people. It was supposed to be a side gig, but became a full-time job after a couple years. And to be honest, between working in the church and supporting our community's young people, I felt like I was giving back and felt like my life had purpose. But as I got more involved with local politics, supporting other candidates, getting involved in Framingham Democratic Party, learning and getting to know our state reps and the Senate president, when the opportunity presented itself, I remember approaching friends and acquaintances in the community, mostly the people I had worked with, parents, teachers, social workers, presenting this idea of, okay, we've done all this work together. What would you think about me running to continue that work?
So you had a very clear understanding of what the job was going into it. It's not like you were surprised. Is that what you're saying?
For the most part.
You thought it was very closely related to what you were already doing at the church?
Yes, there are some parts of it where I thought we'd be doing more public speaking. Those little things like that, where when you're used to preaching on a regular basis, there's not as much of that at the State House. We give speeches. They're often little short remarks at a community event, or maybe several times a year I might deliver a speech while in session.
So you missed that part a little bit.
A little bit, but area ministers know that if they ever need somebody to fill in for pulpit supply, if I ever feel like I need to give a 20-minute sermon or speech.
Most people
often
cringe
happy
at the whole idea of public speaking, but you want it. You love it. Yeah.
But for the most part, the job is sort of what I hoped for. And 7 years in, I really can't imagine doing anything else.
Interesting to think of the relationship between what you're doing now and your work as a minister. Most people think, most lawmakers come out of the field of law, or many at the State House who work as senators or state reps have legal backgrounds.
Fewer today than yesterday.
Really? You see that changing?
It is changing. And I think there are a lot of lawyers, but what I find is if you're a lawyer who practiced law around divorce for 30 years, now you're a legislator, you know a lot about the law, but your experience is actually very focused on one aspect of the law.
Very specialized, right?
I don't think any of my colleagues became legislators after being like experts on state law. And so it's interesting, the small business owners bring a perspective, the lawyers bring a perspective, the nurses bring a perspective. I think I'm the only one who brings the perspective of a ordained minister. But there's a couple of us who ran nonprofits, and I love it because we all try to represent our communities, but to make sure the state laws are as strong and as inclusive as possible, bringing all those perspectives to the table. And because so much more of the job is about constituent services than I ever imagined, I can fall back on, okay, I've had similar conversations with people.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because constituent services ties right into also what you were mentioning about relationships. How do you connect with your constituents?
I try to connect with folks however they can or want to connect with me. And so I had mentioned Senior Center in Ashland. 95% of Mondays, I'm there from 11 to 1. I help set up, I help serve lunch, I help clean. It's a very tangible thing. It's a great way to start my week. But the folks that volunteer there, the folks that work there, the like 50 to 100 people that come on a given Monday, they know that I'm there. And so most of the time we're talking about, what are you doing for the holidays? How are things with your grandkids? But never a Monday goes by without somebody mentioning something they saw on the news, or having an issue with maybe a support check they were expecting from the government that didn't come in, something we were doing about tax benefits for seniors. It's not uncommon for a senior to come in with a letter they got in the mail. Jack, this looks fraudulent. Is this real? I look at it. I've never seen that letter before, but they know that I'll take it, and typically in 5 minutes I can go in the other room, make some phone calls, and tell them that's fraud. Let me
become like the go-to person.
I like to think that I can be that to people, to the extent possible. For other folks, it's reaching out via email or phone call. Some people prefer shooting us a Facebook message. And so I think if people haven't met me and they live in my district, if there are events that you think I should be at, or things that you'll see me at the grocery store. If I'm with my kids, let's try to keep the conversation as short as possible because they grow impatient.
Right.
But grab me, ask, and if that's not the right time, let me know. I can give you a call. We can grab coffee.
So your door's pretty open, and it's all about relationships, is what you're saying, and it doesn't have to be at a certain time or place or on a certain issue. It's pretty wide open.
I try.
Okay.
I try.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the daily routine. I mean, there are times when the legislature's in session, and then there are times it isn't. So who tells you how to spend your time, and how do you decide how do you spend your time? What is there a routine, or what is your routine?
To get back to sort of the part of the job that's the hardest to get used to, most people have a boss. Or when I worked at the church, I had a council. When I ran a nonprofit, you have a board of directors. Now I have 45,000 bosses. There's no one to check in with about taking a day off to spend with a family, or a half day to go on a field trip with your kid. And you have 45,000 bosses that aren't always going to be happy all the time. When you have 12, you try to keep at least a majority. The voters. Well, 45,000 is not just the voters, but all of the people that live in the district. And so I think that's part where we're supposed to vote. The job description is we vote on the law and we vote on the budget. We often vote once a week, maybe every other week on a Wednesday. It's an important part of the job, but for me, it's a small fraction. The actual act of debating and voting, it's everything else before and after that. The preparing of the bills, the hearing from constituents about how they think we should vote on a bill or strengthen a bill. It's the constituent services. It's the being available. no one tells you what your day is supposed to look like. And so how I choose to be a state rep is actually very different than almost anybody else, because we all make it what works for us and what we think works for our constituents. Every 2 years we have elections, and so people aren't shy about telling us what they think we should do differently. And if we're not in the community, we're not hearing from people, we're not being responsive, then colleagues then learn about it, ideally before they lose an election.
Are there term limits or no?
There are not term limits.
So every 2 years you have to run, but it could be for a long time.
Yes. We have colleagues that serve 2 years and they decide that's enough for them, or their constituents decide that's enough for them. And I have colleagues who have served for 20 plus years, and people think of running or not running against them, but their constituents keep sending them back. Because the building and the work is all about relationships, the longer you're around, the deeper those relationships are, the who you know and what friendships you've developed, those connections. When you first start, you don't have any of those. If you're a staffer, maybe you have some of those. But the longer you're around, then you can become a chair of a committee, for example, which then comes with greater responsibilities, which sometimes then means you're able to deliver for your constituents. So,
do you need an office there at the state? You have an office there, but do you need one? How do you work locally?
So there was for a little bit, Rep. Robinson and I actually had an office. It was across the road from Access Framingham here. Most reps who live within an hour or two of Boston do not have a local office. I found that because we weren't always there, folks would come and assume we were there and we weren't. And so it became a little frustrating for folks. When you first start off, you have one staffer. And because so much of the work is in Boston, I wasn't able to ever have, or rarely have, my one staffer here. And so we have our office in Boston, and we closed that office, but now I float. And so what I found was I was paying a lease for that office. People were frustrated because they'd show up and I'd be in Boston or I'd be at the senior center. And then people would want to meet at a time that I wasn't in the office. And so I was still meeting at a coffee shop and buying lunch on top of the lease. So we let that go away. No constituent has told me they miss meeting in that office, because now I can meet them in their backyard at the picnic table. I can meet them at the senior center, at the coffee shops. And some people just prefer to talk on the phone while we're all driving to work.
Sounds like the job most people want post-COVID. They want to be their own boss. They don't want to have to go to an office. I mean, it sounds like it has all those elements in it that people are looking for now. It's a little flexible,
It comes with great flexibility, except those 45,000 constituents contain some who are not shy. And so it seems like you're your own boss and you set your own schedule. But a lot of people have opinions, and some strong opinions, about how you spend your time and what your schedule looks like.
And they let you know, for sure.
And they let you know.
Yeah.
So there are some benefits. I love the flexibility that the job provides me, but the days are long. And I find the more years I'm in, the days actually just keep getting longer because there are more projects that we've started. I see more issues that I want to work on. And even though now I have 4 staffers that I work with, my work hours, my output hasn't decreased in any way. If anything, it's increased. So,
what do you think right now, if we talk specifically about the bills that you're working on, what are the top legislative priorities for the House right now?
For the House, for me,
I think we should talk about both, really.
Okay.
Because obviously if the Houses are different, then those are going to take priority because the Speaker gets to determine which ones get seen or get heard. But let's talk about both.
Okay. So,
but for Metro West and for Framingham and Ashland, let's focus first on those.
So, House priorities as they affect Metro West.
Right.
Okay, I think I heard 3 questions there, but I'm going to try to answer at least the one you want me to say.
I think I have a feeling you can encompass them all.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try. So you're right that the Speaker and Senate President have priorities, and we're very fortunate that the Senate President lives in Ashland. She's our local senator. Those priorities are often the things close to their hearts, but they're things that are great for the Commonwealth as well. And what I find is that priorities we set on Beacon Hill, and it's not just the Speaker, it's the Speaker, it's his leadership team. As a chair now, I'm a part of those conversations. The Speaker has articulated the need to do more around gun safety. The House passed a bill just a couple months ago. The Senate's taking it up soon. I think we'll get a bill to the governor's desk on that by the end of session. The speaker has articulated a need to do more to support seniors in long-term care. Framingham hosts many facilities that take care of our seniors. The pandemic showed a spotlight on a lot of the issues that we're facing on that front. And then this speaker has also talked about needing to invest more in green energy jobs, specifically offshore wind, which not necessarily connected to Framingham, but if the coastal areas of the state are able to depend more on offshore wind, then as we explore other green alternatives inland, then the pressure is off us in that way. This speaker and Senate President have talked a lot about youth health and wellness, something very, very close to my heart. I think every cycle I've been in, we've done a bill relating to youth mental health. And then, of course, to top it off, making sure the Student Opportunity Act is fully funded. I tried to find the numbers of how much better Framingham's doing this year than last year, and I think it was 11 million more for Framingham Public Schools this year than last year. But I think our Chapter 70, our public school education funding, has nearly doubled in 7 years, and that I see continuing, not maybe at that level, but those serious investments in making sure that the Student Opportunity Act is fully funded has been something the Senate President has made a focus of her career from when she first ran successfully for school committee, but also the Speaker, who is a former teacher himself. So yeah, those are statewide priorities that I think are directly connected to all of our districts. Personally, I find that there are 160 reps. The system, the House doesn't need me to file a bill on every topic close to my heart. In my opinion, there were people doing this work before I was elected. Long after you, my bosses, my constituents put me out to pasture, there will be somebody continuing to do this work. And so what I ask myself is, what role can I play in the time I'm given to support those efforts? And so most of the time I invest in supporting legislation is on bills that my name isn't the lead on. My name is listed as a co-sponsor, but most of the things I ran for are things that were already being advocated by somebody else.
Right, but every session is 2 years, and some things just never gain traction. So you got to be there pushing and pushing and hoping that they will come to the surface and be given the time of day and maybe even make it into law.
And we looking over the last several years, there are some really large bills. The Roe Act, for example, when the Dobbs decision came, and something that many of us had taken for granted, bodily autonomy, especially around abortion access, it went away overnight. We did what we needed to do in advance to making sure Massachusetts laws were ready, that if the national understanding broke down, our outdated laws were removed. But we collectively made sure in the weeks after the Dobbs decision that we passed the legislation we needed to protect abortion access, support gender care. Yes, there was one rep whose name was attached to that bill, but many of us, myself among them, invested hours and hours of energy knowing that that was what was best for the Commonwealth. And as the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, something that locally it connects because the issues we work on affect constituents, but of the 160 House members, 66 of them are members of the Progressive Caucus. And I've been the co-chair now. This is my third term as co-chair. We set priorities as a caucus. The Roe Act was one of them. The driver's license bill has been one of them. And as the co-chair, while I have my own 30-plus bills that I file, and every session, several of those become law, and I'm really excited about them, a lot of my energy is put in these larger pursuits that shouldn't be about me, and I think most of my colleagues understand that it's not about getting headlines or quotes in the paper. It's about knowing what needs to be done and putting the energy behind it. And in order for House and Senate leadership to know that it's not just one person's pet project, we have to collectively get behind it and show how not doing this
Right, so
harms
that's
our
all part of the
constituents.
relationship building, and takes a lot of conversations to get people signed on to bills and to get their vote and to get it to the point where it needs to go.
Yes.
So I understand that, sure. What about your committee work? What committees are you on now? I think I mentioned earlier, but for the viewers, what committees are you on now? And let's talk a little bit about that work.
So this session, I became the chair of the House Committee on Federal Stimulus and Census Oversight. It's my first session as a chair, so feeling really excited about not only the additional staff and the additional responsibility, but what it means that my colleagues have entrusted that additional work to me.
What does that committee do?
So federal stimulus and census oversight. Census oversight relates to the census, which is done every 10 years. Where right now we're reflecting on what worked and what didn't work during the last census. We have several years, 5, 6.
Aside from the fact that it got cut short.
Yes,
because of
but
COVID.
making sure we properly count everyone. The census data is used for redistricting, helping colleagues understand what their new district looks like, what that means for them. The federal stimulus part is the largest piece of the committee work. How is ARPA money being spent? Making sure that ARPA funds are spent before potentially they're clawed back or they have to be spent by. The governor has proposed a bill to use some of the interest on the rainy day fund to get more matching funds from the federal government. And so soon I'll actually be chairing my first hearing. I'm excited that our first bill to my committee is one of the governor's priority bills. And so I'll be chairing a hearing directly, discussing that bill, bringing in statewide organizations to talk about what it would mean to pass this piece of legislation, working with the Speaker's office to make sure that any changes we need to make are done so that the Senate already passed it, we can hopefully move it forward, and if it's what's best for the Commonwealth.
And you chair that.
I chair that, yes.
And the other committee is?
And so I currently serve on Healthcare Finance Committee as well, which is the committee that relates to insurance, anything medical, most bills that have anything to do with public health. If there's a dollar attached, might go through healthcare finance. They're good committee assignments. It's the first year where I'm not on some of the. When I first was elected, I had a conversation with the Speaker. He asked what committees you want to be on, and for my first 3 sessions, the ones I was interested in, I became a member of. Children and families and persons with disabilities, public health. A lot of the bills I file fall under the purview of those committees. This year, the Speaker thought I was up for a new responsibility, and so I continue to work on those bills because they go through healthcare finance. But now, talking about millions and billions and working with federal partners, it's a nice opportunity and a good challenge, and I'm grateful to my staff and to the committee for the work they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Healthcare finance, how does that impact your constituents?
Well, we all have struggled with convincing insurance companies to cover something. We've unfortunately had those conversations I just had it the other day with a pharmacist where, this is the prescription the doctor thinks somebody on my family should have. What do you mean the insurance isn't going to cover it? And so all issues relating to insurance, relating to hospitals, it's healthcare finance. And so it's a committee that its profile is wide and growing, and it can be a committee that seems like change isn't happening fast enough at times. But it's a committee that wants to make sure we do things properly, and things are never as simple as we hoped they would be.
It's not related to hospitals and the struggles they're having right now.
Oh, we could spend the entire interview talking
but
about.
Briefly, it's not related, or it is?
Some of those issues would have to go through healthcare finance, but more insurance and things like that. But yes, the hospital situation in the Commonwealth is a concerning one.
It's very concerning, yes.
And remembering that we have the best hospitals in the country, and so not to say other states have it worse, we shouldn't complain, we should constantly be pushing for things to be better. But I have family members who live in other parts of the country. How bad must things be elsewhere if this is what our reality is as well? So,
Jack, Do you have political aspirations? Will you run again in 2024, or do you have other political aspirations?
I am running again in 2020. So actually, so this year I'll be running this this fall again for state rep. I love being a legislator, and I have no intention of running to do anything else. The position allows me to be focused on relationships and people while working on a variety of different topics. And so it's really up to my constituents if they want to hire me again. But I love the work
It's
I'm
good
doing.
that you think of it that way, and you remember that they're the ones that put you in the job.
Oh, right.
You
They're the
have
ones
to
that
do that.
keep me there.
How do you
Yes.
want them to connect with you?
So there's a couple different ways. Email is probably the best. People can call the office. The website offers some resources as well. But you had me put my phone away, but this is the longest I've been away from my phone in years. It sleeps right next to my pillow. I see every email that comes through.
RepJackLewis.com.
Yes.
We've got your number up on the screen.
Perfect.
so
And
people will be on-
jack.lewis@mahouse.gov is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Jack.Lewis
Yes.
at mahouse.gov.
.gov.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Special thanks to State Representative Jack Patrick Lewis for joining me on the show today, and to my first guest, Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll. And thank you for tuning into the Audrey Hall Show, where you will always learn something new. And remember to follow the Audrey Hall Show on Facebook.